This is the second part of creating the metallic shell where we add materials. It's this third part of the Modeling Buildings with Modifiers written tutorial for 3ds Max 2018. Select the Building Glazing module. Then select your material editor. Make sure it looks like this and says Slate Material Editor. If it doesn't say that, make sure you pick it here. You don't want something that looks like that right now. Although this is probably going to do as much good for this exercise, but we're going to stay with the slate. Next, scroll way down here until you see the samples layout. And if you may have your material map browser and the sample slots really small. There's no need for that. Just make it large and open up so you can see the parts. Now, double click here or drag it on the view. So I'll show you that again. I can delete and just delete it here and drag it onto view. Notice it doesn't change the scene materials. If you drag it, you want to choose an instance. Then assign the material to the selection. You should see some changes to the appearance here, so the glass part will be invisible. You can delete this now, and notice that the glass shows up in the scene materials. Next, I'll make this slightly smaller so we won't obscure what we're working with here. And again, scroll down to the sample slots, drag the metal on and choose instance. And notice that this, let's see if I can lay out the children so you can see that there's inputs to this material and outputs. On the output side, you just select and drag until you go in here and you want to select the metallic shell. Well, you can leave this in the view, or you can just select like this and hit the delete key and it's all gone. Scroll down until you can see the mullions material so that it's selected. And over here, select the mullions object. And of course, you can use any method you want to do to add this, but I prefer going assign material to selection that way. So all the materials are done. How do we know what it's going to look like? Unfortunately, as you can see here, these materials are origin design materials. So what we really need to do is to convert these materials. So up on the main menu, if you go rendering, there's an option to convert the materials. So it's called Scene Converter, and it should theoretically change the materials from arch and design materials to physical materials, and so you can see they just changed. So it changed the physical sun environment. I'm not sure it changed the daylight system, so you may want to edit the daylight system and look at the data here for what it's set up to. It says June 21st at 3 p.m. in San Francisco. Now, the new renderers don't really work with the old daylight system, so it is possible just to delete the old daylight system and to add a new daylight system in by just going to lights over here on the create panel, lights, sun positioner, and just drag out a little compass rose. Doesn't have to be very big, and then just select anywhere you want for the sun position. And then you can go the same time, the same date, and probably the same location. Okay, so we're talking about San Francisco, and we click OK. And so this should work well with the rendering. Now I'm just going to not see it. I'm controlling whether we can see it in here, but this is not going to affect how it renders. Now we can try a render production, but we really want to make sure we're looking with the the viewport we want to render is current. Then you can just try render production. Doesn't look too good to me, so I'm going to go to the setup, and just for this one, let's go to render setup and change it to the scanline renderer, and change the, let's just go render production. It's probably not going to look much better. Very little, much better. So let's go change the exposure, and let's change this to just a linear exposure control, and let's just do a preview and see if that works. That looks a little better, so let's try it again. And it looks a little artificially shiny, but that's pretty close. You could go back to the art renderer and see if you can get it to render any better. And again, exposure control could be an issue here. It looks awfully light. So going back to the exposure control, you might want to play with the brightness settings and exposure levels to get it right. Before I stop, make sure you save your work. I'm going to also show you how to create one other item. It's just called a camera. And I'm going to zoom out here in the top view and just going to drag out a camera here. Make sure it's a physical camera. And you can control whether you're locking onto the target. And let's move that target up a little bit. If we're looking up at the building, you can get a sense for what it looks like if you select here and go to the cameras, physical camera. And then let's select the physical camera and then move that one up. And you can dolly it around. If you're in that view, you can just use the dolly to truck it in and out. So dolly can take you in and out, and the truck can take you side to side. Then you can render. So you can play with that. There's a whole lot of controls for rendering involving the draft or medium, and it'll tend to get a little better, a little less pixelated. But again, the exposure control and the lights are critical here. So this is the best I can do with a linear exposure control, and with the active and process the background and environmental maps to adjust the contrast. The physical camera, if selected, you can modify the physical camera and install an exposure control here. And then if you adjust the target level to about 14, and then over here, by doing that, that set this. Then you render it, and you might be able to get a slightly better result. Now, of course, it looks a little pixelated, but that's because in the render setup, we've got a draft level. So it kind of defaults to the draft, but you can bump that level up and re-render it and get a better version. And you can go as long as you want, get as good as you. Okay, so it looks like it's complete now. I hope you'll be excited by what you can create. Please note that the critical value to get this would be the EV, and higher EV gives you a darker subject. So if you went down to 6, it would look washed out. And you can experiment and then just re-render. That's probably what you want to do. is decide how you want this thing to look. But do your control. If you're doing it with this exposure control, make sure that this rollout is open, and make sure you adjust to see how that looks a little dark. So, and then you can save each one of these results by saving the image.